A very good morning to all of you on this webinar. At the outset, I appreciate the team Tathya for taking this initiative for bringing different walks of law to the budding lawyers. Today, we are going to look at jurisprudence from a lens of introspection. What does that mean? It simply means that I'm going to attempt to explain that jurisprudence is not only about what Bentham says, what Austin says, what Roscoe Pound says, or what Carl Devlin says. Rather, it is also about what you are as a lawyer. What is your strength and your style as a lawyer? Now, one common and fundamental understanding of jurisprudence is that jurisprudence aims at answering the question, what is law? In my opinion, beyond this question, it also gives an insight into understanding what is a lawyer. An obvious question might occur to your mind: why do I need to know about all this? Why should I, know about who the lawyer is? I know it already, and that's the reason I've chosen this career profession. And why is it that I need to know my strength? My education and my experience will automatically do the trick. Now, to answer this particular question as to why do you need to do this, I'm going to use and take a help of a quote by Mr. Harold Weinstein, where he says that over the years of our research, it is shown that there's a strong correlation between performance and motivation. People who are working in roles that are consistent with their personality, values, and interpersonal characteristics generally outperform those who are less well matched by a ratio of 2 is to 1. So, friends, over here, what Mr. Harold Weinstein is trying to explain is that when you are performing your career choices, which are well matched with your personality traits, the performance and your job satisfaction both are comparatively higher. And this is equally correct in case of lawyers as well as judges. So, most of you in this audience are already lawyers, and few of you will become in a while. And for all of you, it will really make a sense that you will be able to bring in more productivity and more job satisfaction to yourself if you choose a career option within law, which will suit more to your personality trait. So, friends, let's begin this journey for today. My talk I have divided into broadly two parts. So, first, I'm going to discuss about what are different types of lawyers, and it's going to be a psychoanalysis. And second, how do you identify your style of lawyering and the strength? This I'm going to do with the help of application of theories of jurisprudence. So let's begin with the first part, or the first question of what is a lawyer. Now, for this answering this particular question, what I did here is I have shared a small questionnaire with all of you before joining this webinar, and most of you have filled in this questionnaire and you have given answers. And one of the questions that was there in this particular questionnaire was, what are the different types of lawyers that you know of? So you would find that most of you did respond to this question, and not surprisingly, most of you have very similar answers to it. So a few of you have classified lawyers on the basis of broadly two categories: civil lawyer and criminal lawyer. Maximum of you have done that. Then further, few of you have said there are lawyers who are corporate, domestic, international. Few of you have given classification based on the levels of the trial, that is, lawyers who are at the trial level and the appellate level lawyers. There was one exceptional analysis, which was a psychoanalysis, was on the basis of a lawyer who is a passionate lawyer and a compassionate lawyer. So, friends, no doubt that this classification that you have come up with is no doubt a classification. But this classification is a subject matter classification, or based on the level of practice. What I'm trying to say over here is that there's a possibility that two of you may be criminal lawyers, so your subject matter or subject area is exactly the same, but then both of you would still perform differently because of certain skill set and certain things which are inherent in you. Or on the contrary, there's a possibility that a corporate lawyer, a civil lawyer, or a criminal lawyer may require one particular skill which is equally required for all of them. So this classification may differ. So there's going to be, friends, so when I'm going to do this classification, I wish to put a small caveat over here. This classification or this analysis has further detailing. In our today's lecture, it's merely an overview, it's merely an introductory lecture, and so it's going to be a cursory overview of the various type of classifications, the styles, and the strengths that we are going to identify. Now, the classification, friends, that we have missed over here in your answers is the classification where it is based on the skills, and these skills are inherently based on your thinking pattern. So we already have works of other people. So I'm sure most of you might have in this audience come across the writings of Richard Posner, Judge Richard Posner, but then his writing is more in terms of analyzing how judges think. So that has been one of the pioneering ways of looking at psychoanalysis of the thinking process of lawyers or judges. We have another theorist, that is Carl Jung's typology, who talks not about the lawyers per se, but then I came across a wonderful writing by Marco Novak. And what Marco Novak tried to do is he tried to derive from Jung's typology, and he has given the further analysis. Now, in my questionnaire, there was another questionnaire about the types of skill sets required for your choice of lawyering. And most of you have tried to identify certain skill sets that are required. I would again explain here what were the generic skill sets that you have identified. Most of you identified skill sets as analytical skills, reasoning skills, communication, written as well as oral. Few of you have talked about management skills, and so on. Now, friends, if you just pause here and ponder as to, aren't these skills equally important for a doctor or an engineer? Like critical skills, analytical skills. Of course, the answer is the doctors as well as engineers would require these particular skills. So now our next question obviously is, if that is the case, then what is it that is different that the lawyers do in their thinking, or how is the thinking of lawyers different from the other professionals or different from the lay persons? Now, to explain this question's answer, let me take you to one hypothetical scenario. It's a hypothetical question, hypothetical case. Towards the end of this lecture, I would like to explain the hypothetical scenario where so this is a hypothetical case where you are a lawyer and a lady client has come to you and she wants you to file a petition on behalf of her. She wants to challenge the changes that are made to the labor laws during COVID-19 pandemic. And she says that in the garb of boosting economic activity and market reform, in her opinion, uh, there is an enforcement of forced labor. So, according to her, there are various state governments who have made few fundamental changes to the labor laws. Few states have issued notifications extending the working hours. Few states have passed ordinances stating that all factories and establishments engaging in manufacturing process shall be exempted from the operation of all labor laws for a period of 3 years, of course, subject to certain condition. Few states have suspended the Code of Wages and repealed the Payment of Wages Act. And in these states, there is now no statutory obligation for factories or establishments to give timely wages to their employees. Therefore, the ordinances, they have essentially led to abolition of minimum wages, and in her opinion, this amounts to a violation, complete violation of right to life and liberty of the workers, and she expects you to file a petition on behalf of her and on behalf of the laborers. Now, what is it that you, as a lawyer, would try to do the first? Listen carefully. What is it that you, as a lawyer, would try to do at the outset, in the first step? So I would request over here all of you to type in your browsers slido.com, slido.com, and enter the event code 7990. It will just take 2 minutes, and the questionnaire that I have put up will pop up, and you will have to give your answers over there. You will have to record your answers over there. When you record your answers, we will get an analysis of your answers. Let's do this exercise. Okay. Thank you, friends. So here is the outcome of our poll. So there were five initial stages that I had identified, and I had asked you how many of you would go first for this. So at the outset, so 50% of you said that you will open and read all the ordinances and notifications passed first. 31% of you said that you will first go and see what was the Supreme Court's stand in the earlier cases in context of interpretation of labor laws. 16% of you said that you are going to go and check what is the effect of this labor laws on the society at large of these amendments. 3% of you said that you will first go and find out what is the inclination of the present government, whether it is pro-labor or anti-labor and things like that. None of you attempted to say that, you will find what is the trend of the apex court. Now, friends, you will find that when you look at this perspective of each of you answering the question, there is a different way in which each one of you are thinking. At the outset, you have tried to identify what is going to be your first step the moment you have this case coming to you. Though the case is same, each one of you has tried at the outset to do something different. Now, why this difference happens? Why each one of you? So eventually, most of you might have to do all these stages. That is, you may have to open up the legislation, you may have to look at the precedents, you may have to look at the overall impact. But then what you do at the outset, what you do in the first stage is your primary instinct. That is something which comes quite naturally to you. And that's the reason the moment the problem arises before you, you try to choose that first step. And that shows one of your qualities as a lawyer. Now, to explain this further, the writings of Marko Novak, I'm going to refer here. He has written a wonderful book on the type theory of law, an essay in psychoanalytic jurisprudence. Now, in his theory, what he has tried to do is he has tried to give an analysis or difference between classification. As I had said earlier, also, this is merely cursory and introductory. I've just picked up one aspect of his analysis. He says that the classification of thinking can be divided broadly into two parts, that is, introversion and extroversion. So, introversion and extroversion is where you derive your insights from something that is within, something that is inherent and within you. So that's the most of natural lawyers who have that kind of thinking. And extroversion is where your thinking is based on external factors. You determine your conclusions based on lot of other external factors and not from something which is intrinsic. So in case of an extroversion, you draw your energy from external world, whereas for introversion, you draw your energy from quite alone time and from the internal ideas and reflections. Now, friends, all those of you who tried to, go for the first step, that is, you said that you are going to look at what is the legislation and all. So this is where, you have a way of looking at things which is in an extraversion form. Now, why is it that lawyers though faced by same problem, why is it that they would look at different it in a different way? It is primarily because of the legal theorists who have a different predominant legal thinking, so cognitive functions. So they think that way because they have different predominant cognitive functions, and that's the reason they come up with their answers. Now, before coming to a evaluation of based on your answers as to which step you followed first, that will come towards the end of this discussion. I'm just going to quickly and cursorily going to explain in brief the theories of law. I'm not going to discuss these theories. Likewise, you would have discussed in your normal jurisprudence class. There's a different way in which I'm analyzing it. So, if you look at the different theories of law, the different theorists, they theorize the meaning of the law in different manner based on the sources of the law. So, all these theories who try to define law in a different manner, they are basing the sources in different things, and that's the reason they classify or identify themselves into different types of theorists. So natural lawyers are the ones who source the law, or who locate the deriving of the law or the inherent law into moral principles or into nature. So for the natural lawyers, they would always try to locate the origin of the law into nature or into moral principles. The positivist or the positive lawyers, they would always source law into something which is an explicit posited structure. Like it may be a sovereign, it may be a crown, it may be a monarch, it may be a parliament, it may be a president, it may be any lawmaking authority. So the positivist, they would source their law primarily from the express structure, that is the sovereign or the lawmaking authority. On the contrary, the sociological lawyers, they would primarily source the law into society and vice versa. So they would try to identify how law and society are connected, and whenever they want to find out the source of law, they would go back to the social context of it. And we have other group of our theorists, legal realists. So as you all would know, that legal realist would always source their laws in what judges say, or what is the judge's perception, or what is the apex courts. Of course this differs in common law and civil law countries, but then they would source their law in the verdicts of the judges or in the interpretation of the judges as to what the judges would say about that particular law. And lastly, we have the contemporary theory, that is the critical law theorist. What you or what the critical laws theorist would do is they would not source law either in morality or nature or sovereign or lawmaking authority or social context, or for that matter, even judges. They go beyond all of this. What they try to do is they try to source the law into something which is beyond all of this, and which is they try to locate it in power dynamics. This power dynamics, they may identify it with either gender, or with caste or class, or with uh, politics, or with economics, and so on. So they would always try to locate and critique the tools and techniques of the whole lawmaking or implementation of the lawmaking. So now, all those of you who first went to the legislation, you all are positivists. Friends, again, I'm making it clear here. There's nothing wrong in you being inherently positivist, naturalist, socialist, or a critical lawyer. What we are trying to emphasize over here is that it's very important that you identify what is your primary strength, and then depending on that, you hone your other corollary strengths which you may require for your lawyering profession. So all of those you who went to the legislation first at the outset, you are positivist in your perspective. All of those who went to the apex court's judgments, you are all realist in your approach. So you would want to know what is going to be the outcome if I take up this particular petition, and how the judge or the court is going to respond to it. All of those who looked at the social aspect of it, you belong to both categories. You have trappings of a socialist lawyer, as well as you have a trappings of critical law school or being a critical lawyer. So it may happen that one of it might be very predominant in you, and the other one might be little dormant. So you have to identify that. Whereas the ones who have looked at it from a holistic perspective, most of you would classify yourself into natural lawyers. Why? Because the natural lawyers would always look at a holistic picture. They wouldn't interpret things from bits and pieces. They would first of all look at the holistic picture, and then they would identify the bits and pieces. Whereas the positivist or the criticals, they would start thinking from the bits, and then they might land up building the whole. So over here, uh, this is one of the ways how I am giving my analysis as to why your thinking process or your outset strength, the initial strength, lies in how you would look at or how you would respond to the case at hand or the problem at our hand that you have. Now, this was one example where I had put you in the shoe of the case in that particular case and scenario to make you identify your trait, whether you are a natural lawyer, you are a positivist, you are a critical socialist, and so on. Now, let me take you to one settled concrete case. This case, which I have picked up due to paucity of time, I have removed most of the cases. I've just picked up one case so that it gives you an insight into how do we apply this analysis of jurisprudential theories or jurisprudential thought process into evaluating the cases or our conclusions. So I'm picking up this case, which most of you might be aware. The case that I'm picking up is of ADM Jabalpur versus Shivkant Shukla. There's a 1976 judgment, popularly called as habeas corpus case. I'm sure most of you have read the case. Few of you, I know few of my colleagues who have thoroughly analyzed this particular case. Just for a quick reminder, this case is about an emergency provision, a legislation which had imposed emergency provision, which violated or which suspended people's right to life and liberty completely during emergency was challenged. And in this particular challenge, the court was, there were n number of issues, out of which one of the issues was whether this particular ordinance or the governmental action in suspending the fundamental rights, including your right to life and liberty, whether that amounts to violation of the inherent Article 21 or the basic structure. Now, I have picked up one of the aspects in this particular case, that is the interpretation of the term rule of law. Now, let us look at, I've picked up the paragraphs from the case as it is. Let us look at the majority judgment while interpreting the concept of rule of law. The majority judgment in ADM Jabalpur versus Shivkant Shukla, I quote the majority judgment. They say that the constitution is a mandate. The constitution is the rule of law. There cannot be any rule of law other than the constitutional rule of law. There cannot be any pre-constitutional or post-constitutional rule of law which can run counter to the rule of law embodied in the constitution, nor can there be any invocation to any rule of law to nullify the constitutional provisions during the time of emergency. And Article 21 is our rule of law regarding life and liberty. No other rule of law can have separate existence as a distinct right. The rule of law is not merely a catchword or incantation. It is not a law of nature consistent or invariable at all times in all circumstances. There cannot be a brooding and omnipotent rule of law drowning in its effervescence the emergency provisions of the Constitution. So friends, this was the interpretation given by the majority judgment. So you will understand here that the majority judgment has stopped their interpretation of rule of law only to the extent of wordings of Article 21. They have not gone beyond the wordings of Article 21, and that's the reason they are saying that the rule of law cannot be classified as pre-constitutional, post-constitutional. We will have to locate it in Article 21. Now, friends, let us look at the minority or the dissent in this particular case. All of you are aware of the popular dissent of Justice Khanna, and I quote Justice Khanna. His way of looking at rule of law, he says, is rule of law is the antithesis of arbitrariness. It is accepted in all civilized societies. It has come to be regarded as the mark of free society. It seeks to maintain a balance between the opposite notions of individual liberty and public order. The principle that no one shall be deprived of his life and liberty without the authority of law was not the gift of constitution. So friends, over here, when you analyze analyze these two, it's the same set of facts, it's the same laws, it's the same provisions that all the judges are interpreting. Now, why is it that the majority is interpreting it from one angle and the dissent is interpreting it from another angle? Here, you would find that the majority judgments are more correlated to a positivist attitude, or they are more of positivist lawyers where they are stopping at the wordings of Article 21. Whereas Justice Khanna's verdict or dissent seems to be correlating to more of a natural law perspective where you are going beyond the wordings of Article 21. Justice Khanna is looking at the ambit of Article 21, the ambit of rule of law, which would go beyond the Constitution. So he says that there is something which is in Article 21, which is, which existed even before Article 21 came into existence, and that has to be impliedly accepted. So, friends, to take this a little step ahead, that's where the difference comes between your concept of Article 21, where we talk about procedure established by law and due process or a fair process. So procedure established by law is a positivist way of looking at the interpretation of Article 21, and procedure due process is a natural law perspective of looking at the interpretation of rule of law in context of Article 21. Again, I'm making it very clear over here. We are not saying which one of it is correct or wrong. It is just that you have to identify very carefully what is it that your thought process goes and which comes quite naturally to you. So friends, with the help of this hypothetical example and with the help of the majority and the dissenting judgment of ADM Jabalpur, I've tried to explain you that how and why different lawyers would come with different verdicts based on their thought process or based on their thinking ability or cognition. Now, let us go to the next part of our discussion. The next part of our discussion is identifying your style and strength with the help of the jurisprudential theories. Now, having talked about the different types of theories and how do we look at it, I'm going to use here Professor Dewey's analysis of thought process. So, what Professor Dewey has tried to do is he has tried to classify the human thinking or thought process into 5 logical distinct steps. Now, I'm going to take help of Professor Dewey's analysis and then apply it in context of the legal thinking. So, these 5 steps we have to identify in any thought process. So, when you either as a person or as a lawyer, when you are faced with certain problem or a certain issue or fact set, you are expected to come to a conclusion. And while you come to a conclusion, your journey from the fact set to the conclusion is passage of these subtle steps. The first one is a felt difficulty. A felt difficulty in terms of that fact set. Second is its location and the definition of that difficulty. So locating where that difficulty lies or the problem lies and how do you define that to be a problem. Third, suggestion of a possible solution to that problem. Fourth, development by reasoning of the bearings of the suggestion. That means, to put in simple words, finding out the reasonings for that suggestion. Whatever suggestion you have come up for a possible solution, there has to have a reason why you have arrived at that particular suggestion. And fifth one and last one, that is further observation and experiment leading to its acceptance or rejection, which could also be called as your conclusion or belief or disbelief. And that's the last stage. Based on your earlier steps of logical thinking, you arrive at this final step, that is your acceptance or rejection. Now, let's take a concrete example to exemplify this thought process, which Professor Dewey has tried to explain. Now, a hypothetical case where a man is accused of theft. Now, friends, you will find that when you talk about these logical 5 steps, these steps vary at a very subtle level when it comes to the purpose is normal thinking and when it is a legal purpose. I mean, when the thinking is for the legal purpose. So we have to make a difference between thinking for legal purpose and thinking for ordinary purpose, how it differs. So here I've tried to explain. Now, when this person, this man who's accused of theft, his accusation reaches the ears of different audience. The first is this accusation of the theft reaches his parents, it reaches his wife, it reaches his teacher, it reaches his counselor, it reaches the police officer who's the investigating officer, maybe, and it reaches the magistrate who's going to try the matter. Now, the way each audience is going to identify and go through these stages is something where we need to stop and understand. Let me take example of the first set. For the non-legal purpose, I'm just picking up first stage of felt difficulty, and for the legal purpose, I'll take you through all the 5 stages. So for the felt difficulty, in case of a parent, the felt difficulty would be the social stigmatization that is going to happen when their son is accused. So that's their felt difficulty. The felt difficulty for the teacher is maybe the performance of that child, that person in examination, because he might be an excellent student, he might be an excellent performer in the class or in examination. So her felt difficulty is how this accusation of his is going to result in his performance in exam. Now, the felt difficulty of the counselor is going to be totally different from that of a parent and the teacher. The felt difficulty of the counselor is going to be what is going to be the effect of this accusation on his mental health. Is it going to aggravate his existing mental issues, or is it going to help him come out of it? So it's totally a different way that the counselor is going to face this difficulty. Now, when it comes to so these three, what you would say, audiences, parent, teacher, and counselor, they are going to evaluate, and their felt difficulty and the thought process is going to be completely for a non-legal purpose. But when this audience is going to be changing from these three to the investigating officer or the magistrate, the felt difficulty is going to be totally different. So here, in case of an investigating officer and in case of a magistrate, the legal situation is one so deeply involving one's interest that the litigation is at least the thought is at least thought of as a possibility. Now, its location and definition has to be accomplished with such a precision that the accused, the opponent, the investigating officer, and the magistrate, all of them must so mechanically be bound that, to be satisfied that he has committed the theft. So their statements have to be correlated in a very mechanical manner. And so that's where the location and difficulty is going to be combination of all of this, the legislation, the act, the offender, and the consequence. All of them will have to be correlated. Now, the possible solution in case of an investigating officer and a magistrate has to come in the form of a concrete judgment and not in the form of a compromise, especially in context of depending on the nature of the offense. In case of a parent and teacher and counselor, the conclusion might be totally different from that of the investigating officer or the magistrate. So, so as to the bearing of the suggestion, that is the final suggestion or the conclusion, the legal perspective of it, the investigating officer and the magistrate, they will have to look at it from different ways. So when they are going to look at particular scenario or a specificity, it is going to roughly involve question of fact. And when they are going to come to a conclusion broader based on the legal analysis, it's going to be question of law. So friends, this was really very quick. So now that we have talked about the legal thinking, which is in such a structured manner. So in given similar set of facts, the outcome of the case, it has to be ideally the same. But then that does not happen. So different lawyers and different judges, in spite of having same logical steps, they arrive at different justifications and different conclusions. It is so because the lawyers, they have certain, I mean, the process remains the same, but then the lawyers are inclined towards certain inherent traits. Now, there are certain inherent traits that I have listed for the purpose of our analysis and the introductory lecture today. So let's look at what are the typical traits of based on the type that we have analyzed in our earlier section of our discussion, earlier part of our discussion. We have different types of lawyers that we have identified. Now let us look at what are the inherent traits of these different types of the lawyers. Now the first one, the trait of a positive lawyer. A positive lawyer would always believe in going by the structure and the source of authority. So the structure and source of authority here would be always a letter of law. And that's why we call the positive lawyers also as black letter lawyers. Another trait of the positive lawyers is that whenever they would interpret, their interpretational canons or tools would mostly be restricted to literal interpretation. So they would stop at letters and they wouldn't go beyond that. So, friends, again, I'm making a caveat here. We are not saying whether one trait is good or bad. It is just we are trying to identify the traits so as to decide which trait will be required for what kind of a task or what kind of a legal job. So, black letter lawyering and being a positivist will be definitely useful in particular type of cases and in particular scenarios. So, at that point of time, it's very important that we have this positive trait in you as an emphasis. So, looking at our example that we had seen, all those of you who went to the legislation have a positive lawyer spread. That is, it's more closer towards the black letter lawyering. Now, going to the traits of natural lawyer, natural lawyers would always tend to go by rational, by logic, or the purpose beyond the letter of law or expression of law. So they would always have the instinct of purposive interpretation. They would always try to find out not merely what the letter says, but in what that letter in spirit amounts to. So when it comes to the interpretational tool, so that is another a subject matter of discussion. That is how these traits of theories also decide your interpretational tools or canons. So over here, the natural lawyers, they would have a tendency of going to purposive interpretation, or they would also go by mischief rule of interpretation. So the natural lawyers have a very inherent trait of looking at a holistic picture and viewing the law from a holistic perspective. Most natural lawyers are abstract thinkers and they can always go beyond the letters of law. So we've already seen one example in terms of Justice Khanna. Now let's go to the trait of sociological lawyer. A sociological lawyer would always read law in social context. They would root the law in the society and vice versa. So it's quite a versatile thought process that we have. So the upcoming areas of work that we find in today's world, that is what we label as interdisciplinary studies with law, is something where these kind of lawyers or these kind of sociological traits, they try to correlate the implementation of law, origin of law, its influence on the society and vice versa. So they have quite a versatile thought process as a sociological lawyers. Now coming to the trait of a a realist lawyer, they are they neither go to the letter nor to the spirit, but they are more concerned about the concrete outcome of the case, and their research is diverted more towards judicial power dynamics. So trying to find out, okay, the offender has committed the offense, no doubt about it. So you might have seen criminal lawyers to whom the offenders go by with a confession that they have committed a crime, but then still the criminal lawyer would go ahead and he would be concerned about how the magistrate or how the judges are going to look at the case and what is going to be the consequence, whether the judges are going to find him to be a criminal or not, or a verdict in terms of whether he is an accused or not, or whether the judges are going to convict him or not. Their emphasis is more on that outcome rather than the correlation of law with morality or law with society or law with the natural perspective. Now coming to the traits of a critical lawyer, the primary object of a critical lawyer is to critique the outcome or the techniques of law. Now here, the critical lawyers, one of the traits is that their emphasis is less on the solution. Their emphasis is more on identifying the power dynamics and identifying the base of such power dynamics. So you might have seen the critical lawyers talking about the feminist perspective, talking about the racist perspective, talking about the economist or capitalist perspective, talking about the politics and so on. So over here, their think or thought process normally goes to the critical part of it. Now, friends, having looked at the overview of different traits of these lawyers or these thinking process, you would find that what we could come to a conclusion is that you may different lawyers definitely have a different thinking process and they have different traits. You have to try and find out what is your primary trait. None of the primary traits are, again I repeat, good or bad. You just have to decide what is your primary trait so that you can use that as your strength when you are arguing that type of a case or when you are working on that type of a avenue within your profession. So To justify this, one quote I have found, that is, legal reasoning is not merely a thought, it is argumentation. And there is a vast difference between trying to defend the truth and trying to find one. So, friends, whenever you are posed with normal problems in your life, or you are posed with legal problems or legal cases in your life, it's very important that you try to find out whether you are defending the truth or you are trying to find one, because these traits are going to help you to find out whether you are defending the truth or you are trying to find out the truth. So now, having understood the types of lawyers, having understood how the lawyers think, now let us determine the strengths, as to how do you identify your strengths and how do you balance the use of those strengths. Now, what I have done here, in a very brief manner, is that I have laid down 3 stages for identifying your strength. This is an activity you have to take up for yourself as an introspection, and you may be able to take help or seek help from your teachers, your mentors, your seniors, your friends, and so on. So the first one is introspection and observation. So friends, it's very important that you introspect and you observe carefully what are your instinctive reactions to the general problems and legal problems. Do you tend to understand the parts of the whole picture and then go to the specificity, or it is the other way around? Do you tend to understand the bits and pieces, and from the bits and pieces you build the structure? So whatever you do so through your observation, you may take up hypothetical cases for discussion amongst your friends, your classmates, and then you can observe yourself very keenly as to, at the outset, what is it you try to do. Whether you, as I've already explained, whether you try to look at the holistic picture or you look at the bits and pieces of it. Second important step, having introspected, you are going to come to a conclusion, and you yourself, mind well, you are going to come to a conclusion as to what is it that you do inherently. Second is question. Ask yourself questions, asking yourself as to whether the end result, that you what is the end result that drives your decision making, in both in your personal as well as your legal problems. Now, whether you, when you are coming to a conclusion, whether you derive answers from the outside circumstances, or you derive answers from something within yourself and you try to work it out within yourself. So asking correct questions to get correct answers is very important, friends. So unless and until you introspect, you wouldn't have correct questions, and unless and until you wouldn't have correct questions, you are not going to find correct answers, and you won't find your strengths. Now, the last and very important stage, having introspected, having questioned yourself, is, now that you have found and you have tried to question yourself and found that this is your particular primary strength, now do a little research and find out how do you align your primary strength with your set career goals. Now, in the set career goals, whatever might be the avenue that you are choosing, you will have to find out which career goal suits or is more closer to your inherent strength. I'll just give you one passing example. As I said, this is a detailed study and detailed research, and it has a lot of depth further, which in my research and in research of ILS we are trying to bring in, and the work is still ongoing. So here you would find that, take example of, suppose, as for a judiciary or for a judicial profession, it is always good if you are an introspecting person and you would love to research and look at things. Of course, you will have to look at the other perspectives of the legislation, your clients, the people who are presented before you, the counsel who are presented before you. But then your judgment is something which is inherently an introspective process, though it is based on a number of other extrinsic factors. So you don't have to be an extrovert over there as a judge. Whereas extroversy is something which is required for maybe a paralegal activity or a paralegal profession or profession like us of a teaching or an activist lawyer. For that, you need to be an extrovert. You need to have a lot of data that you can gather from the external world. So if you inherently are an introvert, you would love doing the job of judicial decision making. But if an extrovert goes and sits there, that person will have to compromise and you will have to take efforts to do that. Again, I'm saying that it's not that you cannot hone your secondary skill sets. You can do that, and that is possible with a proper structure and with a proper study and help from your mentors as well as your teachers and your friends. Now, same take example, if an avenue which requires an extrovert personality, an introvert is trying to pursue that as a career option, maybe for because of the lucrative package, or for because the parents might have forced you to get into that profession. You are not going to have natural tendencies. So friends, it's very important that you align your strength with your career choices. Why? Because every day morning when you wake up, you should not have a question, or you should not be faced with the problem, oh, I have to go and do this work today again. Rather, it should be the other way around. When it is aligned with your inherent strength, every day morning you should have that energy of saying, oh, I'm going to enjoy doing the next level of my work, and this is what I'm going to do today. And that's possible with this particular analysis of your strengths and weaknesses as a lawyer. And this is just one way that I have explained you how you could use jurisprudence to identify your strength and your lawyering style. I hope this gives you a little insight. As I told you, this is a detailed work. Further goes, those who are interested further, you can read on it, and you can further analyze it for yourself, or you can do your research in it. So the first reading that I have relied upon is by Nathan Isaac on how lawyers think, where he has used the Jungian typology to correlate the thinking process of lawyers. Then we have second reading by Marco Novak. I've already referred to this. That is the type theory of law and essay in psychoanalytic jurisprudence. And lastly, and a very wonderful writing and a research, a writing based on empirical research. I did not emphasize a lot on a particular perspective of either feminism or racism, because I wanted to give you an overview, but then there are focal offshoots that could be taken up as a research area. So this is a writing by Patricia Snyder on Superwomen Lawyers, a study of character strengths. So wonderful study where they have picked up empirical data from all those successful superwomen lawyers who have passed or crossed the barrier of being a woman, and they have faced a lot of challenges, and how they have faced or overcome these challenges with the help of their character strengths as women. So this is another way how you could use your strength for overcoming the challenges that you may face in your career as a lawyer, or in any other avenue that you choose in context of law. So that's all from my side. I hope you take this further and you try to apply this. I would be happy if you have specific questions. You may write to me as well. I've shared my details with the organizers. They can share my email ID, and you could always approach, and I would be more than happy to help you to further this particular evaluation of yourself and this research. So thanks a lot, and let's begin with the questions that are already posted in this chat box.